Oh, hey there. What's this I'm reading? Well, you see, I recently got stuck playing Sonic the Hedgehog 3, so I figured I'd whip out my official Supersonic Tips for Sega Maniacs. Just gonna page through to where I got stuck here. Carnival Night Zone, Act 2. Let's see. About halfway through the zone, you'll meet Knuckles. He sends you into an underwater area. Okay, I'm getting pretty close to where I'm at. I'll just turn to the next page and... And this is why it took me absolutely forever to beat Sonic 3. That's right, I never actually beat Sonic the Hedgehog 3 until Sonic and Knuckles came out, and I was able to play as Knuckles. You see, he takes a different path in Carnival Night Zone, so he never ends up here. But let's back up. You see, I wanted to cover why this 92-page book by Bede Games might just be their worst strategy guide ever made. Now, for those who don't know, Bede Games isn't even around anymore. I wonder why. Or at the very least, they aren't known as Bede Games anymore. You see, they were a publishing company in the early 90s that specialized in video game strategy guides, like this. They went on to have quite a bit of success, eventually merging with Prima Games in 2015 and continuing to make strategy guides under that name instead. You see, before the age of the internet, you had 3 ways that you could get through a game. You either figured it out by yourself, you asked a kid at school, or you bought the strategy guide. Now, back in 1994, I cared a lot less about the information in the guide. I just wanted to have something that I could look through. I just loved looking through the pictures. Damn, that's a handsome son of a bitch. But the biggest thing I was hoping to find was codes. But this guide is very different. It was very confusing. Now, before we even open it up, let's just look at the back of it. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 covers 1 and 2-player game, Sega Genesis and Sega CD version. Wait a second. Sonic CD version of Sonic 3? And what's this about includes Game Genie codes for the Sega CD? Clearly they know something that I don't. When you open the book, you're greeted with some nice little Sonic art. Paging past the table of contents and the publishing information, we finally get to the intro. And now introducing Sonic. He's quick. He's hip. Hip. This is going to age all of us 100 years with this kind of writing. He's a cool dude with an attitude. It's still the same great story, a fight for love and glory. The guardian of the island, Knuckles, has been tricked into being in cahoots with the evil Doc. Double the trouble, double the fun. That's the statement of the great men in Double Gum. Whether or not you've already mastered the earlier Sonic games, when you transport yourself to Angel Island in Sonic 3, you'll experience the most spintacular Sonic adventure yet. Yeah, if you haven't already guessed, the writing in this is incredibly dated, and it only gets worse. Under the new moves for Sonic and Tails, we learn about the Super Spin Attack. Or, you know, just pressing literally the only buttons on the controller. Any of them. You can't really mess it up. It's all 3 buttons. Now, as a kid, I really counted on this guide to flesh out the world of Sonic 3 for me. While it wasn't technically bursting with any sort of useful information, they certainly took liberties with expanding the lore of the game as a whole, such as this little bit. After Sonic and Tails land on the island, they meet up with Knuckles, who warns them of dangers that await. Which, you know, when you're like 8 years old, that just seems so much cooler than what we actually saw, which was just 3 seconds of this. But that's part of the charm of older games like this. Games that have very loose story, told quite literally in the manual of the game that so many don't even have access to now. What we saw presented to us versus what we're told is actually happening could often be completely different. But I love strategy guides like this that tried to lay it out for us regardless. Sure, the tips in these were pretty bad, but in the 90s it was a lot less about trying to find answers and a lot more about just trying to get more of the game that we already loved. But speaking of the tips, we should really take a look at what this guide provides. We start with a basic breakdown of the zones, We got some real great descriptions here, such as, your first stop on the island is Act 1 of Angel Island. If you can finish both acts that make up this zone, you can continue your trek to begin exploring Hydrocity. Okay, so that tells me pretty much nothing about what Angel Island Zone is. But alright, moving on. Hydrocity Zone. As you might guess from the name, Hydrocity is a watery place, and as we have already mentioned, not a favorite environment for a hedgehog. Marble Zone. Marble Zone is a nice place to visit, but you wouldn't want to live here. What? Okay. Carnival Night? The Carnival Night Zone is one of the most colorful, dramatic places we have ever visited in a video game. Ice Cap Zone. Grab your snowboard, let's hot dog in the mountains. What is this? What does that even mean? I've never heard the term, let's hot dog in the mountains. What? Now, here's the thing with Sonic 3. This is a classic side-scrolling adventure. The general premise is go right until you win. It's not an RPG filled with labyrinths and mazes or side quests. So ultimately, a guide like this doesn't necessarily need to exist. And yet, here it is. I actually question whether the people who wrote this even played the game, or if maybe they just saw somebody do it. Let's take the beating the first boss section for instance. This takes place pretty much at the very beginning of Act 1 of Angel Island, maybe 1/4 of the way through the stage. And they've dedicated almost a full page on how to beat Flame Breath. Yes, that's its name apparently. It tells us to wait for the ship to be low enough to hit it and avoid the flame attack, and after 2 or 3 successful attacks, he'll make the ship leave. But the thing is, anyone who's played Sonic 3 for 30 seconds, they'll know that you don't have to attack it at all. It comes down, torches Angel Island, and leaves so quickly. And that's that. Now, maybe I'm nitpicking here, but we're going to come back to why dedicating almost a full page on how to beat this unbeatable boss is so ridiculous. And yes, they do cover how to beat this boss when you actually get to it. Saying it takes 4 to 6 hits, it always takes 6 hits. Enemies in this game have a set HP. But I digress. While also claiming that after you beat Act 1 of Angel Island, you successfully cleared one of the longest acts in the game. What? It's the first act of the first stage. This doesn't even come close to being one of the longest acts in the game. But that's the kind of guide this is. You can tell that they just kind of haphazardly threw it all together. Now, believe it or not, I actually tried to track down some of the people that worked on this. I only managed to find one person, but according to her LinkedIn, she only worked for the company as a contract worker. I sent her a message to see if I could get any insight on the creation of this guide, but as of recording this, haven't heard back. So I've talked a good deal about the total lack of use of this guide, but it really comes to a head in the only zone in the game that could really use it. Carnival Night. You see, this zone actually had some maze-like qualities to it. The second act is infamous for being a roadblock for so many first-time players, myself included back in 1994. So let's see what the guide has. 1, 2, 3, 4? 4 pages dedicated to getting to the first act. The second act? This is barely anything. An entire page dedicated to 2 sentences. Act 2 begins as Sonic runs down this diagonal red and white striped tube. A lot of it takes place underwater. You used an entire page for that? The second page gives us such lines as Sonic can only breathe for about 20 seconds underwater. And again, maybe it's nitpicky, but this book had an entire team in the credits. How are we going to let this type of grammar slip through? The page literally ends with meeting Knuckles and being sent to an underwater area. All he does is turn off the lights. But okay. And that's it. There is no solution on how to solve the hardest puzzle in the game. There isn't even a guide on how to beat the boss, and this zone actually had one of the more unique bosses. Cool, thanks for the... Now, remember when I said... Now, maybe I'm nitpicking here, but we're going to come back to why dedicating almost a full page on how to beat this unbeatable boss is so ridiculous. Yeah, that. You see, this guy dedicated nearly half a page to fighting a boss that you don't fight. Meanwhile, it didn't give any pages to one of the harder bosses in the game. In fact, it shows no pictures, it doesn't show any information, it gives nothing at all about it. Not only that, but it gives no tips on how to even get to this boss. Now, I'm not kidding when I say Act 2 of this stage was notorious. You see, there is not a single other place in the game where you have to press up on the D-pad, let alone up and down, back and forth. So when we arrived to this room with the floating barrel, it meant that it was either time to reset the game or wait for a time over and then run right back into the room and do it again, which is honestly my strategy of choice. Most of us had just tried jumping and hoping that we could eventually slip through, which failed every time. This room was so infamous that later on during some interviews, Yuji Naka and Takashi Iizuka would later go on to apologize for its creation.
So I presume those people found that level quite difficult to understand, and I would actually be the person responsible for programming that level, so I am extremely sorry. Thank you.
And yet there I was, as an 8-year-old in 1994, using this guide that was supposed to help me get past this. And not only did they skip its inclusion entirely, but they skipped how to do the boss as well. This was the one level that they needed to cover. The one level. They had 94 pages and they just didn't do it. When you hit the Ice Cap Zone Act 2 section, you can tell they really just gave up. The pictures they chose to use are all cropped and zoomed in, so you can't actually see what's happening in any of them. I mean, look at these. Can you tell me what's going on in a single one of these pictures, let alone where Sonic is even supposed to be in the level? When I was writing this script, I actually laughed out loud while looking at these pictures because I know that whoever made this guide just gave absolutely zero fucks about Sonic 3. They were just doing a job and therefore didn't notice that the cropped images show only the score, time, and the rings. This is the equivalent of doing a Google image search and just selecting the very first thing that comes up and using it for your report. Jumping forward to Launch Base, I found myself just staring at the final page of this guide. You see, Launch Base Zone ends with a 3-phase fight. The guide sorta covers the first phase, gives no tips on the second phase besides aim for the top of the ship near where you see the dock sitting, stay away from the bottom of the ship where the rockets are located, and that's it. No mention of the third phase, no mention of the hardest boss in the game. Instead, they gave us a picture of Carnival Night? Immediately followed up by a "Congrats, you did it" on the next page. And that's it. Or is it? It's not. Because you see, this book is 94 pages long, and that congratulations, that's only on page 46. So what did they fill the rest of the book with? This is really where my confusion began. You see, they dedicated a couple of pages following this to covering the ins and outs of the special stages, the 2-player competition mode, but then suddenly, Sonic CD! Now, I cannot stress this enough, but in 1994, information regarding video games was definitely not readily available. You believed every rumor that you heard from kids at school, and that was that. You see, I was 8, and I did not piece together that Sonic CD was a completely different game that I did not own. This was in the Sonic 3 guide, so it had to be a part of Sonic 3. I couldn't make it past Carnival Night Zone, so to me, it was just parts of the game that I somehow was missing out on. I would longingly look at these pictures and dream of eventually getting to play these, and boy would I be disappointed when Sonic and Knuckles came out, and I realized that after beating Carnival Night Zone, they weren't there. And boy would I be disappointed when I eventually played Sonic CD and realized that game is just not that good. In the back of the guide, there were codes for Sonic CD, but again, I just assumed that these were accessible in Sonic 3, so you can certainly bet that I tried to do them. Or more specifically, I tried to do the sound and music test one, would fail, and then get disappointed that I couldn't do the codes from the following page. The final paragraph of the code section was essentially the world's first Sonic fanfic. You see, it says, if you manage to defeat Robosonic and put him out of his commission and then defeat the Doc, Sonic can then find and rescue his true love, Princess Sally. Once she's rescued, Sonic could find himself with a date for the evening. we'd like to suggest taking Princess Sally to a movie, perhaps Back to the Future or The Time Traveler or some other clock bender. What? This guide ends with an index, which makes me question who was just paging through this going, I have to know what page Earthquakes was on, or where can I find the electronic surveillance system? And then finally, a list of Game Genie codes printed on the back cover, and not a single one to get past Carnival Night Zone. Cool. So now that is actually that. I'm not exaggerating when I say this is actually the worst strategy guide that I've ever owned, and yet I really love it. I would page through it constantly admiring the pictures, looking at the levels I never made it to, and just constantly building up the hype for them in my head, knowing that one day when I did play Ice Cap, it was going to be absolutely amazing. This guide is terrible, and I love it. But I guess that's to be expected when you're 7,031,794th place on Amazon.